Hello, I'm Dave Messina, general partner at Pioneer Fund for the Future of Health. Pioneer invests in early stage bio and health companies. We have an amazing team of over 100 bio and health founders, all Y Combinator alumni, who help us evaluate, source, and ultimately support the companies we invest in. One of those is with me here today, Connor Hailey. Hi, Connor. Great to see you.
Hey, Dave. Good to see you too.
So today we're going to be talking about Assort Health, one of the companies that we invested in 3 years ago, very early when it was just the two founders, John and Jeffrey. And they have just announced their Series C. This is valuing the company at $1.2 billion, huge milestone for them. And so we're going to talk about sort of what we saw early and why we're excited about this company. But before we get into Assort, let's start with you. Take me through sort of your path as a founder and YC and joining Pioneer.
Yeah, I went through YC in winter 21 with a company called Assort Health. It's a company that optimizes home healthcare. So home healthcare has historically been very slow. It's been bespoke, and the company attempts to expand that so that it's scalable. And after I went through YC, Pioneer Fund is one of the investors. And it was natural to sort of ask if I could join Pioneer Fund at that point. I love the model. I love the idea of investing in YC companies and gaining experience in evaluating them. So I think I messaged Tim and graciously the team accepted me.
Yeah. And we're very happy to have you. You've been a very active member over time. You are, coming at this from the perspective of a healthcare founder. What do you think about when you look at the healthcare landscape today?
Healthcare is a really complex industry to invest in, right? It often comes from the fact that the buyer of the product and the user of the product are two different people. And so frequently you need to think about how to value every stakeholder's interest in the product that you're building. Right. So that's obviously the patient, it's the physicians or nurses, and then, of course, the actual buyer themselves, whether that's a health system, an insurance company, or in the case of Assort, specific specialty clinics.
Yeah, for sure. I think all those things are really important. And before we jump in more deeply into Assort, what does a senior venture partner actually do at Pioneer? How did you end up on the Assort call?
Yeah. Senior venture partners at Pioneer Fund, I think, are venture partners who are more active than your typical venture partner. We look to lead companies based on experience that we've had or interests that we have. So it really comes down to finding companies through the YC channels that we're interested in, joining and potentially leading those investment teams and calls, and then hopefully being able to deliver good news to founders that we like to invest.
So Assort Health actually is a great example of the Future of Health Fund being able to invest outside of Y Combinator batches. So Assort Health was founded by John and Jeff. John had previously founded a Y Combinator company, but Assort did not go through YC. And I think Alexander on our team knew John a little bit from having worked with him a little bit on his first company. And so I think that's how we got introduced. This is something that I think is part of the power of our network, where other founders know about Pioneer when they are building a new company or they have a friend who's starting something new. They often reach out very early, and so we get connected to them. I think that's what happened here. And then you got pulled in because of your great experience in healthcare and running Assort Health. So take us back to that call. I think we met them like almost exactly 3 years ago in like mid 2023. Do you remember what your first impressions were talking to them?
Yeah, I thought even though they weren't in YC, that if they had been in YC, that they would have been among the strongest healthcare founders in the batch. And so it is nice to be able to, having been in YC, seeing active YC companies, being able to compare those with companies that are not in YC. And we had a vigorous debate around Assort. I think that's also one of the advantages of Pioneer Fund. None of us are trying to get promoted, right? We don't need to toe the line or have certain opinions. A number of people in the fund are very vocal, right? And I think being able to have those types of interactions really gets to hopefully the ground truth of whether we should invest or not.
Yeah, and I guess we should talk a little bit about sort of what exactly is the problem that is sort of solving. So it is a communications layer between doctors and their patients. So the way I like to think about it is that most of the time today, even though it's 2026, when you want to talk to your doctor's office to schedule an appointment, understand your medication, maybe get a prescription refilled, whatever it is, you have to pick up the telephone. And so that means you've got to call within business hours, probably means you're going to be waiting on hold. It probably means that you've got to be speaking in English. So that's like a real pain for patients. Nobody likes waiting on hold. Most people have to work during the day. So like finding time to call sucks. And then I think what maybe people don't understand is on the doctor's side, they need to have staff people to answer those phones. Those people need to know their back end systems well enough to get the information the patients need to make that appointment or refill that prescription. And they also need to know enough about the type of medicine that's being practiced at that clinic to be able to give the right answers. That's all a bunch of stuff that is difficult to do on the doctor's side. So you kind of put those all together. And now you've got Assort Health, which can come in and with their system, it can answer the phone anytime, day or night, in any of, I don't know, a couple dozen languages at this point. It already connected to the backend systems at the clinic. And so the patient can get the information they need, and the clinic doesn't have to staff a bunch of people to serve those patients. I remember Assort there being a real discussion around that company. And that was exactly how the process is supposed to work. Do you remember some of the open questions that people were weighing?
I think the primary question was around competition. And, the idea, and if I recall correctly, they didn't have a product at the time, but they had talked with a lot of potential customers. And with the competition piece, if you don't have a product yet, if you don't have traction, it can be difficult to say how competition will impact the company you're interested in investing in, right? And who has the highest likelihood of succeeding in that space. And, personally, I think that larger VCs or VCs who haven't been founders have a sort of narrow definition of competition. And it's one that I think isn't born out of how you actually achieve product market fit, right? Very, very small differences can actually mean the difference between whether or not someone buys the product or not. And so I think having that perspective as founders, we can kind of run through that and see how a company may reach product market fit even before they actually do.
Yes, for sure. I think those early phases where it's easy to dismiss, that's a scenario in which we as founders at Pioneer tend to be a little bit more understanding of, having been and lived through the early days of our company, maybe more understanding of what actually is going on, and maybe discounting some of the things that seem more weighty to later stage or to other investors.
I mean, even at Axel Health, our first customer, they originally kept saying, well, I already have a scheduling tool. Why would I use yours? And then we put the health professional's location on a map on the patient's phone, and then it clicked, right? Oh, I see. It's Uber for nurses. And that wasn't exactly the right characterization, but it was a lot closer. And it wasn't a scheduling tool, right? It was a lot more than a scheduling tool. And so having that tiny difference in feature sort of changes the ideal customer profile, changes who's willing to engage with you. And I think that it was, for me, Assort had more than 100 customer conversations or potential customer conversations. And I just felt like, okay, these guys know, even though they don't have anything built yet, they know how to get traction here because they know who their ideal customer profile is. And they know what that set of features is that's going to really push them over the edge.
Yes. And they had a pretty impressive background coming in, right? So I'd mentioned John had previously founded a company in the healthcare space. Before that, he was in med school at, I want to say it was Stanford, one of the top schools. Jeffrey had been very early in building in AI and had that background as somebody advanced in programming. And so pretty powerful combination, which turns out to be a great fit for what they built at Assort.
They had the skill set. And then certainly one of the things that I thought that they had was the hustle, right? And the ability to meet with that many customers in such a short period of time, prospective customers. You just knew that they were going to latch onto something that, like you said, they had the skill set once they did latch onto something to actually execute on it. And they did, right? And I remember specifically, we had talked about health systems on the call as well, because they started with mid-market specialty clinics, typically owned by private equity firms. And in healthcare, you always want to expand to health systems. That's where the dollars keep racking up. And they did it on the timeline that they said from the call that they likely would. I think it was within 3 years. It's barely been 3 years and they already have health systems, right? So, but they just clearly had an understanding of how you move step by step to start in what seems like a kind of small space of mid-market specialty clinics, and then eventually just continuing to win that and expand more and more. And then that skill set gave them the ability to execute on it. And to their background, the product needs to be reliable and it needs to do the job that it says that it's going to do. Especially I've found in healthcare when you're selling to clinics like this, that they are hesitant to adopt technology that cannot replace entire workflows because they still have to pay someone to do 40 hours per week worth of work. What's the point in paying someone for 40 hours per week and then also having this technology if the person wouldn't be fully utilized anyway? So you really have to say, okay, we can take on this entire workflow, and Assort at this point really is, right? Like you mentioned, they're doing all sorts of things at all hours of the day to be able to take on those tasks for those mid-market specialty clinics to really say, okay, this is worth investing in because this actually moves the needle on where our financials are.
I think that insight you had at the time that there are plenty of category defining companies that win on execution. Yes, you need to have a good product and that's important, but you saw, I think, early that they had the hustle, not just from these customer conversations. I think they were even maybe starting to go into conversations about real contracts at that time.
Yeah, we invested in a company that had sort of a similar setup, Bland, almost at exactly the same time as Assort. And with both of them, you can really feel that their level of iteration, the speed of their iteration, and whether that's in the case of Bland, it was on the product, and in the case of Assort, it was largely in that conversations and understanding the business model and what product was going to allow them to close customers. For me, it always comes back to how fast can you iterate? How fast can you take the feedback that you're getting from the marketplace, whether that's through a product or conversations, and iterate yourself to something that they're actually willing to pay for. And the guys at Assort really, I mean, it was top of, like I said, top of the batch in terms of how they were progressing through that and their ability to do that.
Why is the speed of iteration and the speed of execution so important?
I think it's really easy for startups to die. You may run out of funding. You may want to go get a real job, right? There's so many reasons that you can give up, and being able to get that quick feedback loop essentially gives you an escape velocity, right? In a reasonable amount of time, you're able to come up with something that people are willing to pay for. And it shows that the founders are taking feedback from their customers very seriously, that they're not militant about their vision. You know, sometimes you have founders who do that. Steve Jobs would be one of those founders, right? But a lot of times you don't need to be Steve Jobs. You can just iterate your way to something that people are willing to buy by listening to them and by quickly implementing your feedback. And customers love that too. If they give you feedback and the next week or even the next day, in the case of some founders, they're seeing their feedback reflected in the product, they're more likely to invest their time and soon money in that.
Yeah, I think absolutely that's the case. Really, iteration rate or your execution rate compounds, right? The faster you can go through that process of getting to building the right thing and really connecting with your customers' needs and serving their goals, the faster that you can get to a product that people are actually going to buy and tell their friends about, and you can grow much faster.
And I think calling it compounding is the perfect description, because if you're iterating at a pace of, one feedback feature per day and someone else is doing it at two, like you're saying, that compounding is going to be immense over the course of the year.
So that's one thing we saw. They had a great background. Another thing we saw is that they executed really fast and were able to compound that rate to really get them to where they needed to go. But their product actually had some unique insight too. I think one of the things that we noticed was that, well, it'd be easy to dismiss this maybe as just sort of like a fancy wrapper around somebody else's voice AI product. But they had real medical insight and understanding of workflows and the specialty knowledge of the particular types of medicine that goes on at specialty clinics. I think that's something that maybe helped them win customers early.
I agree. I mean, it goes back to the point of the features that a buyer is looking for in a product are narrow, the features that actually make them want to buy it. And you have to have an understanding of that market. I don't think that it's realistic to just say Anthropic or OpenAI will make this, because they're pieces of the workflow, like you said, and understanding of the customers and how they interact with their patients, how they even interact with other pieces of software, EHRs, especially in healthcare, that make it infeasible largely for big companies to throw out a roadmap and say, let's go after mid-market specialty clinics. But once a company like Assort has a foothold, then the sky's the limit. They have their beachhead and then they can just expand from there.
So here we are 3 years later. We invested very early. The company has gone on to raise, I think, over 200 million total now in just 3 years. And 190 million patient interactions. So their growth rate is crazy. I hosted John, one of the founders of Assort, at an in-person event just like 6 weeks ago, and they were at 150 million patient interactions. So that's 40 million they've added in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
The thesis that you had that ultimately led us to invest at that time was around execution and distribution mattering more than the technical moat. What did we get right? What maybe surprised you about how they've grown over the last 3 years?
I mean, those are not easy customer profiles to sell to. Their sales cycles are shorter, but to be able to prove your value very quickly within months of a pilot period, to be able to get physician buy-in and staff buy-in for that, and then to end up moving and sliding their way up the curve to larger health systems and organizations, that's all execution, right? Anyone could have had this idea, but the ability to be able to put your nose down and work through all of those problems as they happen and just knock them out of the way is something that, we know a lot of founders. I think that's one of the advantages of YC and of Pioneer Fund is we know so many founders. We know a lot of founders who've been successful. You can start to pattern match on people you've seen do well. And that's in a position that really not very many investors can be in because they don't know as many founders, I think, as we do, right? There are entire social networks, right? Not just our professional networks. So yeah, I think that provides a major advantage.
And I want to talk a little bit more about Pioneer in a second. But before that, just to say, I think the thing that surprised me the most about their rate of progress is some of the challenges just in, you mentioned absolutely the sales in that industry is tough. I also think about just the building of an organization so quickly. One of the things that I talked to John about when we did a fireside chat last month is how he's handled hiring and staffing up such a larger organization that's grown so much. And he talked about how important it was for them to keep the company culture as they grew. And part of that was in making sure that the people in the company understood how much that was their role to keep the company culture the same, what had made them successful to that point. But also he and Jeff still meet every single person that they end up hiring, which, the busy founders running this company and that they see hiring as so important that they still take that time.
Yeah. And it's impossible to know how that will end up when you're in a 30-minute meeting, right? That particular piece. You can take guesses at it. If someone's approaching something the right way, what their demeanor is. But I mean, hats off to them. It's incredible to be able to scale the organization and keep that type of culture.
So talking about Pioneer, I think this company, Assort Health, is a great case study for why Pioneer is built the way it is. So Pioneer Future of Health Fund, which is our dedicated health and bio fund, we've got over 100 health and bio founders who are all YC alums, all founders who can get access to companies like this early and understand the model that they're trying to build. But in your opinion, what is it about the way that we approach investing that helps shape the outcome here?
There are a couple of things. Having experts in the room to understand the business. And frankly, I think, from all of us, we all have our battle wounds, right? So understanding potentially even where we went wrong in a sales cycle or whatever it may be, and how that influences our decisions. And then one thing that I really love about Pioneer Fund is that our partners and general partners are always willing to be wrong or overruled, quote unquote, right? Just the idea that I think that it takes a lot of self-awareness to be able to understand that you're not always right, to listen to SVPs, VPs, whoever's on the call, that if they are really passionate about something, about a company, about a founder, that it's still an investment that we can make. And I've never worked at a big firm, but my guess is that, general partners at a lot of those firms are kind of the boss, right? And what they say goes, and everyone falls in line with that. But it's just not the way it works at Pioneer Fund. And I mean, as we can see, it genuinely leads to success.
Yeah, we do not seek consensus in our decisions. In fact, it's probably, I think, the wrong approach because it tends to water down, I think, opinions. Here is a great example where you had a very clear understanding of what they were doing and why they were likely to be successful. You saw in them that they were outlier founders. Alexander on our team also healthcare background, also saw it. And that is what persuaded me to say yes. I think, trusting you and Alexander and knowing your expertise, having built companies in this space. Even though I didn't see it as clearly as you at the time, I was persuaded by you because of your conviction. And that's the kind of outcome that we love to see, where we as a team can bring our best to every decision, hopefully, and don't require everybody to have a consensus opinion before we move forward.
And I think that it's helpful that, obviously we have GPs and you're the GP of the bio fund, but that there isn't that level of, again, hierarchy in terms of like, oh, I'm trying to get promoted to principal or
Right.
to senior principal or whatever. I can just say what I feel and you're going to take that opinion one way or another. And it's the same with everyone else. And I love that we can reach good decisions that way.
Yeah. So for founders out there, what does a sort's success teach you about winning in a crowded category? What do you think kind of stands out to you?
It reinforces execution and that you can have a crowded space that is something that other founders can potentially do. But if you're backing founders who have a great background with high rates of iteration and execution, who really deeply understand the market and have had those conversations with customers or have personal experience in that market themselves, this just reinforces that, right? That's what you want to go after. And again, I think, us as founders at Pioneer Fund have a little bit of an edge in terms of recognizing that, right? Because in many, many instances, we've been through it.
I agree completely. And I think also this was 3 years ago when we invested in them, when AI was much more nascent than it is today. One of the things I think about is that now, today, and into the future, as the technological edge is going to be harder for anyone to maintain because it's so much easier to build now, that reemphasizes sort of paradoxically the fundamentals of what makes a good company, which are things like execution and understanding your customer.
I think investors and other people who say that there won't really be any more great companies because everyone's just going to be able to build everything, I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding that just having the technical ability was the only thing that would get in the way, right? And there are companies like that. There are highly technical companies, that certainly I'm not qualified to found, right? But in general, there are a lot of ideas that are really just about execution. And so I still expect that we'll be backing those founders who have that ability and that they will still win these spaces, with massive market share, even though the technical barriers are reduced. So I totally agree with you.
I think then we might even see them be able to do it faster than we've seen in the past because there's less of a technological requirement to build something that truly meets customers' needs. So it should be exciting to see.
Absolutely.
One last question for you. What are you most excited about to see from Assort next?
I think continuing to move into health systems and really dominating that space, in part as an investor, obviously, but the other part of me as a patient, right? I mean, you don't often interact with good AI, right? Certainly not in healthcare settings. And so, even just as a societal thing, being able to actually interact with AI that I want to interact with is exciting as well. So, I think it's good on both fronts.
I agree. I'd love to see that. I can't wait for it to be easier for everybody to get the healthcare that they need. And I think this aspect of what they're doing, care delivery, really putting patients and doctors together to work together for best possible care, is going to be really amazing to watch. Connor, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for being part of Pioneer and working closely with me. Really great to look back on Assort and celebrate their success.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Dave.
Thanks.